TERAO. I think they will join us. People will join us on the way.
Yeah.
So welcome to the Industry of the Future Working Group of the French Chamber of Commerce and Industry in China. So I'm Bruno. Many of you know us, know me. I'm Bruno. I'm the coordinator of the working group. I'm also the managing director of a company called Civeco, which provide digital solutions, consulting services for industrial risk management. We have a diverse group of attendees today. I think more people will join, more people registered actually. We have a mix of people from the industry and let's say engineering firms, consulting firms, mostly a very industrial group of people, which is exactly our target audience. So thanks to all of you for joining us on a Friday afternoon. Most of us are in Shanghai under lockdown, as you know. So before we get started, I will just spend 1 minute on safety, safety awareness, safety first, even when working from home. Don't forget what we learned in the plant. Pay attention to your surroundings. Fire safety, electrical hazards, stairs. Be careful with knives in the kitchen. Be careful how you sit when you work. Don't forget to rest your eyes, take breaks, exercise every day. All the above apply to your family members as well. So maybe don't hesitate to train them, train your wife, kids, husband, parents on good safety practices, even at home. So last but not least, I would suggest, and I apply this to myself, spend family time if you can. Don't just be locked down together, but talk and play. Perhaps we have a very special opportunity to spend more time together, cooking with your kids, having meals together 3 times a day, and maybe this time, this opportunity won't come again. So that's all for safety. That said, let's go ahead in this event, and let me introduce our speaker, Gaspard of TERAO. Gaspard has been in China for over 7 years, and working for TERAO as a business development manager. TERAO is a leading sustainability consultancy, and he will introduce more about the company. And today we'll talk about how manufacturers can assess and mitigate the environmental impact of their industrial assets, their plants, and in particular looking at design, operations, and relevant monitoring with a focus on energy management. Before Gaspard starts, a note on Q&A. We are fairly big group today, and more people are supposed to join. Let's see, but so the most practical way to take the Q&A is to ask the question in the chat. You can probably find the chat somewhere. Ask your question anytime, and we'll go back to look at the questions at the end of the presentation. We'll send you a copy of the slides, which also include our WeChat contacts, so you don't need to take screenshots. Just focus on the discussion. So, Gaspard, I think the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bruno. Hi, everyone. So actually, Bruno explained the topic of the presentation today better than I could do. So I'll move on to the next. So quick introduction of a company. TERAO, we are a French building engineering company, pioneering the sector of building sustainability, founded 30 years ago. We've been in China for 12 years. We are global with 3 offices in Asia, Shanghai, Ho Chi Minh, Singapore, and we work in we have offices in Europe and Americas, and we work also in Africa, Northern America. We are specialized in building and sustainable engineering, working both on new construction as well as existing sites, focusing on industrial assets, which represent 60–70% of our project portfolio here in Asia and China. And we work as well at organizational level on carbon footprint related topics. Just a few keywords about our expertise. So we are a technical company. We work a lot on the topics related to energy efficiency, comfort improvement within the building, as well as carbon footprint calculation and reduction, either at group level or asset level. We work as well on some specific studies on other like general topics such as the implementation of renewable, or water savings, etc. And we work on the implementation of green building and well-being certification, such as HQE, Haute Qualité Environnementale, the French standard, GPL, the Chinese one, BREEAM, the English one, LEED, the American one. Let's focus on today's topic. So first, I'll give you a quick introduction on the carbon neutrality. Then we'll basically look at how energy management or a proper energy management can lead to some carbon emission reduction. Then I will provide you with some examples through a couple of case studies. And last but not least, Bruno will give us basically information on what at stakes, the importance of what at stakes when we talk about energy monitoring. So basically the importance of it. So first, carbon neutrality. So I think now it's becoming a topic of awareness that there is an issue with global warming, and so basically, in order to mitigate climate change, a target of not going above an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius was set up by scientists. So following the target, countries or economic groups decided to set up their own targets as well as roadmap in order to mitigate their environmental impact over the next few years and reach this overall 1.5 degree target. For example, the European Union set up the target of being climate neutral by 2050. And last year, China set a target of dual carbon, Shuangtan in Chinese, with a first target in 2030, carbon peak, and a target of carbon neutrality by 2060. So we can all act in order to reach these targets. At individual level, we can start taking actions, for example, by trying to switch our diet to a less carbon intensive one, for example, trying to stay away from imported meat and similar options. We can also look at our transportation. We can see in some countries a massive push towards going back to rail transportation in terms of instead of plane transportation for short distances, as well as being more energy conscious. At corporate level, the standard approach is to first calculate the carbon footprint through a standard approach, which is the carbon footprint assessment, then identifying the ways to reduce the carbon emissions, acting on the reduction, and aiming at the company target. A quick introduction here. I don't know if you're all familiar with basically carbon footprint lingo. In the standards, we consider we split the carbon emissions in 3 categories. Scope 1 gathers the categories from the direct emissions. For example, if you're a farmer, the direct emissions would be the exhaust gas coming from your tractors and equipment, as well as the gas coming from your cars or ships. The scope 2 are the indirect emissions related to energy. So being manufacturers, you rely on electricity, steam, cooling to run your operations. This electricity is provided by the grid often, and basically it's coming from an electric plant. In China, it's still quite common to burn fossil fuels to generate electricity. So the carbon emissions coming from the plants are basically the carbon necessary to generate electricity utilized to manufacture your products is basically what constitutes the scope 2. Then the scope 3 are basically all the other indirect emissions. And basically the scope 3 captures the rest of the value chain. So in the scope 3, you have, for example, all the emissions related to upstream and downstream transportation of goods. You have also all the emissions related to your raw materials. Also, so for example, the emissions related to the manufacturing process of your suppliers. And also you have emissions related to the use of your products by the clients of the company. And all the also important point, we consider 6 main greenhouse gas with different global warming potential. Actually, the carbon dioxide is the less impactful, but in order to simplify the calculation, we convert all the emissions of greenhouse gas into carbon dioxide. That's why we speak a lot of about reducing carbon emissions, but actually we should rather say reducing carbon emissions equivalent, because we need to focus on the other greenhouse gas. Here, just a quick stop on the definitions. We hear often carbon neutrality or net zero. Is there a difference, and what is the difference? So based on carbon trust, the difference is the fact that carbon neutrality includes in the perimeter scope 1 and 2, but the scope 3 is not mandatory, and the scope 3 is quite a complex and can be quite a big one based on different value chains. And net zero includes the 3 scopes 1, 2, 3 that I just showed you, and basically must be aligned with the 1.5 science-based target. So now let's move on to basically carbon reduction through energy management. Here, just for you to understand, at building level or site level, we split carbon emissions in 2 different categories. There is the embodied carbon and the operational carbon. And let me show you what it includes. So the operational carbon are all the emissions related to the energy being used during the operation stage of the building or the site. And the embodied carbon are all the emissions related, all the emissions apart from the operational carbon, actually. So for example, all the emissions related to the extraction and manufacturing of construction materials and equipment. All the emissions related to the transportation of those material and equipment on site, as well as the installation and assembly during the construction stage. During the use stage, all the carbon emissions related to the maintenance and the use of the site refurbishment. And of course, the last but not least, the end of life. That's why more and more companies are trying to find ways to upcycle and reuse materials when we reach the end of life stage. So today we're going to focus on the operational carbon, because this is the one related to the energy being consumed on site during the operations. So actually, what is the relation between operational carbon and energy consumption? It's actually fairly simple. Basically, to calculate the operational carbon, we need to multiply the energy consumption by the energy carbon content. The energy carbon content is related to the local energy mix. So therefore, we see that there is a direct proportionality relation. So if we want to decrease the operational carbon, then we can work on energy reduction as well as energy offset. A quick focus here. I think it's quite interesting to share information on the electricity mix in China. So we saw that operational carbon is directly related to energy consumption and the energy carbon content. We often consider China as a whole country, and we don't really understand that there are differences from one province to the other. We can see actually that the energy mix changes drastically from the north to the south and the west to the east. For example, Yunnan, which has the most virtuous energy mix, has a carbon content of quite small. So I don't know if you can see, but 90 grams per kilowatt hour. For your reference, the carbon content of the grid in France is 80 grams. So we can see that we are quite close. The reason for that is the fact that Yunnan relies mostly on hydropower to generate electricity for the grid. On the other part of the other end of the spectrum, Hebei, which has a energy carbon content of 1 kilogram per kilowatt hour, relies mostly on fossil fuels, especially coal. So an easy way, or I would say not necessarily easy, but a way for companies to reduce their operational carbon could actually be the location of the assets in places with more virtuous energy mix. So how do we optimize and reduce energy consumption of buildings? Basically, it lies on 3 pillars. Understand the energy consumption through energy analysis, improve the energy consumption through optimization, as well as control through energy monitoring. So how do we understand the consumption? Then we measure it. We can measure. Those are pictures taken on site where somewhere we conducted an energy audit. So we first start with understanding the energy consumption. Companies have more and more equip the sites with meters to track the energy consumption of each equipment. It's also a way. So basically, when we measure, we can understand the energy breakdown of the site, and therefore deduct the related carbon emissions. And we can identify where to focus where to focus on to reduce the carbon emissions of the site. Then optimize the consumption. So I will share with you in the case studies more information on that, but basically we can utilize tools to understand the way the site behaves and find ways to optimize it, make it better. For example, the energy modeling is a great tool that we use to simulate the site in terms of its material, in terms of its geometry, in terms of its location. So we take into account the impact of the climate, in terms of industrial process within it, in terms of number of people within the building, etc. So we simulate the building, and within this model we can compare different strategies and identify the most relevant one, leading to the lowest consumption. Energy management system. So the purpose here, there's a lot of writing, but basically the purpose here is to monitor the energy consumption and take corrective actions. Bruno, in a little bit, will share more information with you on that. And basically, once we monitor, we have a clear understanding of basically where is the energy going in the site, and we can set up KPIs to improve it on the long run. Some examples of KPIs can be the energy consumption per unit of value, or comparison from one year to the other year, to basically identify the trend and check whether there is an improvement. Also, energy consumption of some specific equipment per unit of value. And so, following this, when we monitor, we can take some actions. For example, temperature set point adjustment per season, airflow setting optimization for the ventilation system. Sorry, equipment modification, reparation, and maintenance routine. So those are typical actions to be taken during the operations to maximize the efficiency of the site. So now some case studies. I selected a few case studies, one for a greenfield project, and two for existing sites. So you can basically, we can compare the approach. This is a manufacturing site, a chemical manufacturing site is in Anhui. This site is not built yet, but it will be constituted of 4 buildings: a warehouse, an office, and 2 process buildings. So in order to minimize the carbon emissions of this site, the first approach was to calculate the future carbon emissions. So utilizing the energy modeling tool that I shared with you earlier, basically model the site and its future energy consumption through the different seasons. So we run the model through the year to understand, to have a full understanding of the behavior of the site. Based on this understanding, we can calculate the energy consumption per usage and per building, and then we can deduct, by using the multiplication I showed you earlier, the related carbon emissions. We also calculated the embodied carbon. An important aspect here to notice is the fact that for the energy efficient, the energy intensive buildings, such as the process buildings, you can see that basically the ratio of operational carbon is much higher than the embodied carbon. And the embodied carbon is actually almost you can almost neglect it. Whereas for some more office building, warehouse building, tertiary buildings, basically the embodied carbon takes quite a big chunk of the overall carbon footprint if we consider a lifetime of 50 years. So once we have an understanding of the carbon emissions for the site, we can take corrective actions to optimize the future and the future carbon emissions. For example, here, those are examples of strategies. So installing exchangers, identifying the ideal lighting power per area and reducing it. That leads to a lot of savings, not only in electric savings, but as well cooling savings, because lighting brings light, but as well heat. Optimizing the fan equipment, also a lot of savings. Optimizing the HVAC design in order to reduce pressure drops, for example. Identifying the ideal installation thickness for different parts of the site. For example, in order to do that, we calculate the heat balance. So what is the internal what are the internal gains? So the heat generated within the site And what are the external gains? The heat produced coming from the climate impact. And then we can fine tune and find the ideal installation. For example, for some buildings, often for some process buildings with internal gains, actually often we want to reduce the installation in order not to trap the heat inside, which would require more cooling to reduce. But the ideal value can be achieved thanks to simulations and models. Another example, this is a existing site in Jiangsu. So basically, this company had and still has actually a very ambitious target of carbon emission reduction by 50% within 3 years, because they work in a sector which is under high scrutiny for its environmental impact. So this company had no understanding of their energy consumption actually. So as I said earlier, the first stage is to analyze the energy consumption. So here, to understand what was going on site, we utilized the energy modeling tool, where we actually built a virtual version of the site that we calibrated with some operational data, such as production information, equipment running data, operation data. And based on this model, which was mimicking the existing site, we could obtain the energy consumption analysis, and as well analyze how to act. So within the model, the simulation, we could benchmark different design strategies to optimize the site and take corrective actions. So here, the most important one was the implementation of solar PV, because there were a lot of gains from the roof, as well as the energy mix in this part of Jiangsu was not very virtuous. Some other strategies, for example, also done with the roof by optimizing the insulation, as well as installing some reflective materials. And we are now working on optimizing the geometry of the workshop to basically optimize the waste heat recovery rate within the site, and maximize the heat produced by some heat treatment ovens. And the implementation of a building management system will be a way for the site managers to track and take corrective actions on the long term. Last case study. This is a building during operations in Wuhan. This was a technical center, so with labs and workshop for prototypes. So basically, here the example is what can be done through taking simple corrective actions by gaining a clear understanding of the way the site behaves. So by analyzing the BMS data and by combined with some simulations using energy thermal modeling, we could identify that we could basically lower the load on the fresh air supply by simply optimizing the distribution, and especially identifying the space which were unoccupied versus the one which were occupied. This seems fairly simple, but actually was not done at all, and you can generate savings, even though here the carbon emissions is quite tiny, but you can generate savings, and there is no investment required. So there's an immediate return on investment. It's actually, you just better use the system you have at hand. Second idea is basically optimizing the temperature set points and the airflow during different seasons to obtain the same level of comfort. Here, by just basically modifying the cooling temperature, by decreasing the cooling temperature, we could achieve the same thermal comfort by pumping less air within the building, which means that we would lower the ventilation-related consumption, and achieve actually by just modifying the way the building is being operated, we could generate, which is not negligible, 2.5% decrease in carbon emissions. Those are strategies which were identified and studied within the building thermal energy model. So just to finish, a few examples of projects. So Aremon is a French company, industrial company in Jiangsu, with whom we worked on first calculating the carbon footprint, the full carbon footprint scope 1, 2, 3 in China, for the operations before setting up the tracking tools that they use on a yearly basis to track their reduction in carbon emissions to reach the company targets. We set up a global emission reduction offset action plan, and we are now working with them on both their existing sites as well as their greenfield sites to lower the carbon emissions. Another project, this is a plastic injection factory in Zhejiang with for the food industry, so food grade clean rooms, so a lot of ventilation related consumption. So we worked on optimizing the design from the early stage of the optimizing the future energy consumption from optimizing the design at the early stage. And the last example is an existing site, Plasticomium, where we worked on reducing the energy consumption in order for the company to reduce its operational carbon. So this is my company information that we can share later. Bruno will share with you more information now on energy monitoring.
Thanks, Gaspar. I'll just take a few minutes to try to illustrate and to continue a little bit on Gaspar's presentation to talk about the question of monitoring and monitoring. Both in terms of technology, people think a lot about technology, but also in terms of the activities that are required to ensure continuous improvement, which Gaspar mentioned, of course, in his presentation. Well, as some of you know, my background is in maintenance management, and my company has developed IT solutions to help industrial plants improve their maintenance and to control the technical risk. And we've been working together with TERAO for many years. They are part of our partner ecosystem. We are using each other expertise as needed. So coming from this background of maintenance, we've come over the years into the topic of environmental compliance. I'm trying to move the slides. Gaspar, I don't know if maybe you can do it better than me. Thanks. Over the years, we've been, my company and myself, over the many years, 20 years in China in this business, we have seen how environmental compliance, more generally HSE, I would say safety and environmental issues have become top issues, major concerns for companies, obviously, and a big part of our business. So, and one thing we've learned is that more monitoring, looking at KPIs, looking at dashboards, and quite often very beautiful dashboards, is just one part of the equation. And what actually generates improvement is not looking at a KPI, of course. It's improvement in terms of energy consumption, carbon emissions are related to maintenance routines, modifications in the plant, and some are one-off actions in a way. You put solar panels on your roof, some modifications, but many of these activities, and Gaspar mentioned a few of them, are actually ongoing activities that you want to continuously improve. So to illustrate this, I would take the example of one very recent project, which is the integrated waste management facilities of Hong Kong. Is a major Hong Kong infrastructure project. Basically it's a waste to energy plants, and it's a very large, complex plant. And we happen to be working with them, and we started the actual delivery of the system about a month ago. And I use this as an example because, well, you have beautiful pictures here, of course, but it's the system we implement there, which they call the OMS, Operation Management System. You could say it's a digital twin for operation and maintenance, is both a reporting platform. So you could say a dashboard, quite a comprehensive dashboard for regulatory reporting, where the end user is actually the Hong Kong Environmental Protection Department, the EPD. But the same tool is also a tool for plant management. So for day-to-day management of the plant and all the plant activities by the operator of this infrastructure, which is a joint venture between a Singapore company, Keppel Infrastructure, and the China Harbor. I won't go into details, but they have the two aspects: the reporting aspects and the management aspects. The system gets data from a number of subsystems. You could say IoT type of subsystems. DCS, there's the building management system, different kind of SCADA type systems, and other things. And you see some examples of the data managed in this system, which cover all the technical activities on the plant. And actually, this is a big part of the job. And a whole list of indicators, many of them related to emissions, to energy, to waste, to water, and so on. So it's a kind of good example of a large, let's say, a platform for monitoring. And I won't go deeper into this, but I'll go on to make the main point I want to make is really this. And I try to draw a beautiful picture because I had some free time. The idea that monitoring, having beautiful KPIs, and all of us have seen this, is just the tip of the iceberg. Putting a few sensors, having your KPIs, use software like Power BI, everybody can do it. What really matters, and the complexity is in the bottom of the iceberg, is how do you manage your improvement activities? How do you plan, manage corrective and preventive actions? And these are typically activities that your technicians will do, operators, maintenance staff. So, typical example in the industry is you decide that you should clean or change filters regularly in your HVAC system. Now, are you sure this is being done? Are you sure that your inspections are carried out properly? Are you lubrication for the production process? Lubrication in rotating machinery is a very important way to reduce energy consumption. Are you sure your technicians are doing the lubrication rounds as planned? And often having a paper checklist is not enough. The paper checklist is always, everything is always good. And this has become actually the main focus in government audits. So when there is a problem, environmental compliance, safety problems in a plant, the government auditors will actually look into, they don't trust paper records anymore. They actually look into a proof of execution. And I have a recent example with an Italian customer where they had, it's not environmental related, it's safety related. They had multiple fire incidents in the plant related to electrical cabinets. They had to report to authorities, mandatory reporting for fire incidents. As you know, they got audited. They actually identified the root cause of the problem, and they found they had a problem in all the electrical cabinets. So they decided to modify all the cabinets, and they actually did not do it. So when we came in as a consultant, we found that everything was perfect on paper. Root cause analysis, action plan, and all the actions were carried out according to the paper. But then when we looked at the plants, we went to look at the cabinets, and very obviously they had not done the modification. And the government auditors came and they saw the same problem. So, implementation, compliance is the harder part of the problem. And that's what I write here. It's about people in the end. So people all dream about, the automated plants, and you have IoT everywhere, and then whatever, the metaverse, and nobody does anything anymore. The reality is we the people are doing the things, especially improvement actions. So there's complexity into this. It's not just a few meters and a dashboard made with Power BI. It's much more complexity in the data to manage and the user interface of such a system. And I'll conclude on this and with the last slide, and then we can launch the Q&A. But just to the lessons learned from the monitoring and the long-term monitoring, and let's say the system support, is that when it comes to monitoring, as I said, it's fairly easy. Actually, most companies find they can do by themselves. Setting up a few sensors, deciding where to put your sensors, installing them. Most companies, technical teams can do it, using data from SCADA, BMS, using the SCADA BMS as a tool for this, and then designing a beautiful KPIs using a tool like Power BI or Fine Report or whatever, sometimes Excel. Somehow anybody can do, your own team, and lots of different suppliers can do this. That's the easy part. I would say be careful with suppliers that use a lot of big words and their system is like magic, you know, and it's usually not like this. It's not so simple. So we recommend that you go and compare and check and ask the hard questions, and have you done this before, and how do you actually do this? And as I said, it's about people in the end. So I think KPIs is easy enough. Now, how do you manage the activity, the long-term improvement activities that are carried out by your own people or sometimes by subcontractors? We found over the years that there's a standard called ISO 55000, is the asset management standard. It's a very good, it offers a good framework to prioritize and to define how to manage and how to structure such a project in the long term. Now, you've all heard about ISO 50000, the energy management standard. You have all heard about ISO 14000, the environmental management standard. They are all related, they're all based on the same principles, which are the principles of ISO 9001. You could say the PDCA cycle. ISO 55000 is, I would say, a little bit more general. It covers all these activities together, so it makes it a reference, a good standard, and it's quite practical. So we use this, and together with TERAO for the system part, but also for the, and that's my conclusion, for the long-term monitoring and support activities for your improvement program, and that's things like a yearly audit, having a third party to come and look at the progress every year. So not just the initial project and then off you go, but it's support in the long term. And something we do is a monthly follow-up. So we do this a lot for maintenance and asset management in general. And if we require a specific expertise, like we would rely on a company like on TERAO for environmental related or sustainability topics, and TERAO would do a similar approach with regular training and coaching. So again, the idea of not only doing a project in the beginning and then putting together nice KPIs, but actually helping the manufacturers to enforce a long-term improvement plan, and that can make a lot of difference. And it's usually the part that is a less looked into, I would say. So this is it has very good potential for improvement. That has been, I think, the experience of both TERAO, myself, my company Civeco, and I think a lot of companies are there in the field. So on this, we'll go to the last slide to ask for the questions. Again, you'll get a copy of the slides, and our contact details are there, so you can always contact us. And what I will do now is to try to look at if we have any questions in the chat. Let me see how to do this. I think Gaspar can also see the questions. So we have 2 questions in the chat. So maybe Gaspar, can you see them?
Yes.
So
for SME company, 150 people, 5 to 10,000 square meters, how many dedicated full-time employees would you recommend to work on scope 1, 2, 3 to make sure implementation? It really depends on the, for the scope 3, basically, it depends on the complexity of your supply chain. And where are your customer? How many types of raw materials do you source? From where? Where are your clients or customers located? What is the use made of your product once you sold them? So there are a lot actually. It's actually quite technical. We have a team of people working on that. And for example, for an SME, typically for this type of company, the whole process. So it's a calculation of scope 1, 2, and 3 would take around 2 months, and setting up the action plan would take again 2 months. And this is considering an experienced team. So I would say, I mean, if you have a full-time employees who are quite hands-on already on these topics, I would say a similar amount of time. Knowing that there is a big impact when you do this type of work, and basically the accessibility of the data. So how is your company able to sort the data from the different departments related to the operations? This is sometimes a bit of a challenge, and this is what can impact as well the duration of the mission. If you have global activities and you rely on data coming from different other countries as well, you need to ensure that everyone is on board. That's why it's important to have a team which drives properly the process, and with a matrix of responsibility in place, with a steering committee for the mission. So there's a lot of structure to be built for the mission to be conducted properly. So I don't know if I answered correctly, but question 2: how long does it take to achieve improvement to reduce by half the carbon emissions of a factory in average? 1 year or less? I mean, it's a very general question. It depends on the. I mean, reducing by half for me seems. It really depends on how energy intensive is the factory. So it really depends. If you have reducing the energy consumption by half is actually quite a big challenge, but it depends on where you start as well. If your company has been working on implementing energy reduction strategies for a few years now, like we see in many companies, then it's actually it gets harder and harder to make improvements. We work with clients, for example, in the pharmaceutical sector. For them, controlling the energy cost is a big challenge. So they've been working on that for a long time, and sometimes they run out of ideas. So they look for outside expertise to find additional ways. So it's hard to answer. But honestly, even for non really optimized site, reducing by half seems quite a lot to me. For non-optimized site, what we see at most would be short-term 30-40%. But bear in mind that often to reduce your energy consumption, you need to invest as well. For example, in better equipment, you need to optimize the geometry of your site, and basically the optimization of your site also has to integrate within the continuous improvement in the strategy that you have for your site in terms of investment. And so often it cannot be done in one day. It can take a bit longer. But this is also something you can set up a roadmap in line with your targets, and you can sequence the investment in order to reduce as fast as possible, but while being conscious of the investment that are also required.
If I can make a quick comment on the first question, I mean, just a general comment about these SME and talking about full-time employees. In my experience, I found that SMEs companies in general have seldom can actually allocate a full-time staff on an improvement project like this. So one thing we do a lot on general assets or maintenance or operation related improvement topics is we try to define priorities so that the existing team can actually is able to work on the improvement as part of their daily job. And most companies have people whose job is already dedicated to industrial improvement. If it's the maintenance manager, for example, he already has a responsibility to improve a lot of different areas in the plant. So how to design a project to avoid having to add headcount, knowing that for most companies it's just impossible to hire a number of extra people. That's just a comment on.
If I can add something on that, based on our experience, like what we've learned from our different projects, a model which works quite well is for example, as we are expert in this field, so we calculate the carbon footprint, scope 1, 2, 3, and on the way we train the company employees who are in charge of, for example, EHS or related topics, production. We train them, and we basically build some tools for them to calculate the emissions on the long run, and we train them on these tools. These tools are tailor-made to their operations and to their needs, and basically they don't conduct on the baseline year. They don't conduct the calculation. We do it with them, but then they gain through the mission. They gain the knowledge to continue doing it on their own, and then after we can do it on a continuous basis. So I think this is more realistic, because as well, if you want to calculate properly, it's based on international standards, which also takes some time and expertise to apply. So let's see if I can add something. So
let me read the next question. So I will start from the last one, which is actually related. But by investing in scope 1, 2, 3, how much percentage do you think we could improve the net margin of the company? That's a very good question. Any indirect benefits? Also, for example, have you heard some extra empowerment of employees toward a future global warming concern? So you have two different questions in one here. One more on the net margin, and the other one more on the direct benefits, empowerment of employees, which is more general. What would you say about this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. An important point. I mean, in terms of net margin, once again, I cannot give drop a number here. But one important aspect is the fact that actually, and you realize that when you work on reducing your environmental impact through the carbon emission indicator, often reducing carbon emissions, it actually means optimizing your operations. So we took the example of energy consumption today, which was a very good one. But basically, it works as well through if you work if you screen your suppliers in terms of carbon emissions, it's a way as well to make sure that they get more efficient in their operations as well, and that therefore then they maybe a bit of a long stretch, but they are more in control of their cost themselves and on the way they do their business. So basically, it brings a lot of benefits to the operations to start being more in control of the carbon footprint of the company by sourcing differently. I mean, it basically impacts all the different departments of the company. But to go back to the second part of the question, actually, empowerment of employees is a big topic, and it's at start it's often not really considered by companies. I mean, not all companies, of course, but many companies see mostly the economic return of such strategies. But actually, some companies which already which have already started doing this process realize that they can really build a strong value core for the companies around the topic of sustainability, around the topic of being more respectful of the environment. And actually, employees are often very much motivated to work every day for this bigger purpose. This is something that we've seen. But on the other hand, it's actually also a challenge. So if you want to really reduce the environmental impact of your company, you need to have your collaborators on board. And actually, sometimes it's finding the right ways to motivate people and raise the awareness can be quite a big challenge. There are different ways, creating some proper systems within the company through, for example, like a coach. So the company can train some internal coaches on some specific topics, and these people would be act as a point of contact, and they would be in charge of spreading the knowledge and the values within the company. There are a lot of different strategies.
Gaspar, there's a question on data sources. You showed different regions of China which have different carbon emission factors due to the electricity mix and the grid structure. So which data source can be assumed to be reliable, accountable to obtain this data?
Actually, regarding the grid emission information, there's quite a lot of data online, and I think it's quite well detailed. So we trust quite. I mean, the official data is the one we find online is actually quite good. It's quite up to date.
It is, and we have a last question, and that may be let's see if we have more after that. Is carbon neutrality becomes an important requirement for public brains, big companies, and that is actually, that's my comment. This is actually the main driver for such a project, and not
Yes.
commercial, not financial improvement. Let's say this is a different motivation. It's also a top-down requirement to their supply chains. So your suppliers, components supplier, for example, do you see the carbon neutrality possible to achieve in all industrial sectors, and which sectors are less eager to achieve carbon neutrality in the short term? Do you see differences between different industrial sectors? I think that's the question.
Yes. Actually, I could be quite cynic here. The sectors that I see which are less eager at the moment are the ones who have less pressure. So as you said, there is a important requirement from public brands and for big brands, but some sectors are more like the scrutiny, as I was saying. For example, steel manufacturers are under a lot of pressures, but you see maybe the medical sector, not that much. The food sector, if you do consumer brands, yes, but otherwise, if you like foods, not that much. So it's really from one sector to the other based on the pressure. You can see the automotive sector. There's a lot of pressure because the OEMs are under pressure, and there is the pressure cascades on the suppliers, but also peer-to-peer pressure within the same sector. That is to say, now being more in control of the carbon emissions. So being able to prove that our products' carbon emissions are lower than our competitors, it also becomes like a strength. You differentiate themselves from your competitors, and if your client needs to reduce their overall carbon emissions, they would be ultimately happy to source some less carbon intensive products as well. So this is also, it's actually, many companies see that as a burden, but other companies see that actually as an opportunity. They see that by being proactive on these topics, they can differentiate themselves faster, and after they don't compete, they have one more thing to compete with their competitors: the quality, the cost, and they have one thing which is sometimes actually not that hard to implement, which is a lower carbon footprint.
To comment further on this, and if we see differences between industry sectors, it's more, of course, some industries are more asset intensive, bigger machines, and so on. So it's anyway, these topics is naturally more important for them. Then, of course, as was said in a question, that large global brands will have some kind of global program, and they will put pressure on the local subsidiary and then their suppliers. I'm not sure there's really a difference from one sector to another. It's more a question of being a global manufacturer. And then we see the impact of the local regulations. So those areas, maybe not directly carbon neutrality, but other aspects of environmental compliance for which the local authorities are pushing for. And there's been very strong pressure in the past few years. This is a major driver to such projects. And you could say that's across industries, but of course some industries, heavy polluters, let's say, companies that can have an impact on the public due to their size or their location will be prioritized by the government. So they will be the first to react. So again, it's not necessarily a difference by industry. And for me, being my own experience as in our company has been, some of you know, we work a lot with environmental infrastructures, government companies, water and waste, and it might be counterintuitive for many of you who are from the industry, from international manufacturers, but actually we saw the pressure first on those utility companies. Well, you could say because they deal with water and waste and they are public infrastructures, but they're actually SOEs. So many of you might think they don't have this awareness. But we saw such projects coming, years ago, and I personally see that the manufacturers coming later, which actually is good as a supplier because we have an experience we can use. But it's an interesting phenomenon where maybe multinationals come somehow a little bit later compared to certain local companies in the environmental industry. So I think we've covered those. We had 5 questions, and thanks for those good questions. I don't see others right now. I think maybe we will close the session now. You will get a copy of the slides to your email addresses, and in the slides you will find our contact details. I think including our WeChat contacts. I think don't hesitate to go back to Gaspar, to me as well. There's a question in the chat I just see now. You want to take it? Let's take the last question, which is in the chat. Carbon capture and sequestration is viewed as one of the approach in Europe for carbon neutrality. China is working on capture, but what is the approach of the authorities on sequestration? That's a question for you, Gaspar. I have no idea.
I don't see the question actually. Oh, it's in the chat. Sorry. Oh, yeah. Can I capture
in the chat? Yes.
Chinese capture on sequestration. I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, there is a lot of work being done on regreening some regions. So, for example, we can see a lot of efforts being done on but this is not only related to carbon sequestration. It's also related to environmental protection, to biodiversity protection. But at the end, it all falls together. But for example, we can see a lot of work being done on the regreening some big areas in order to. I don't think actually that the initial goal is to reduce to sequestrate carbon, but it will be also part of the product, part of the benefits. Apart from this big effort on regreening, which is the main way to sequestrate, I'm not sure at this stage. But I think these strategies are still early stage. But at the end of the day, to achieve carbon neutrality requires work being done on all the different aspects. It's not, I mean, in my opinion, if we believe that by building the right carbon capture technology will manage to solve the issue, I think we can be lying to ourselves. I think the idea is really to work on all the different aspects, try to reduce as much as possible all that can be reduced. Once we reduce as much as possible, which brings as well some other benefits, we can work on offsetting, and then we can work on basically work together with compensating schemes, etc. But I would still recommend to work first on reducing before looking at these options.
Thanks a lot for this. Thank Gaspar for the answers. Thanks everyone for the questions and for attending this. Thank you so much, Gaspar, for your very interesting presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks to the chamber for organizing this. We will close the meeting, but again, don't hesitate to come back to us, to Gaspar and myself, if you have any question. And generally, the Industrial Future Working Group welcomes suggestions, ideas, requests, any kind of feedback. If you have ideas on topics for future sessions, if you want to recommend a speaker for webinars, and hopefully soon again for real life sessions where we can share. Normally we have coffee and food. And I think today, as you could see, maybe in the beginning I had my coffee, but next time I hope we can share these together. So again, thanks all of you for your attention. The weekend is coming. I think some of us are working tomorrow, but I wish you enjoy a good weekend and take advantage of the lockdown. If you can, spend time with your families. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.